Hello everyone and welcome to the very first episode of the semi-regular series, The Golden Age Superman Reviews and Commentary. So, a few weeks back I announced that there would be two different semi-regular features videos showing up in the channel. So I usually do the comic book reviews with I review the new books that I get every week. Uh, but because I've cut on the number of books I'm buying, there will be weeks within a month where I don't get any books. So instead of not putting up any videos, I decided to add these two features, which is this one and the retro reviews. The first episode is up. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. Uh, and this one, I think this series is quite anticipated by some people. Uh, so I will be reviewing the Golden Age Superman stories using the Superman Chronicle trade series, 10 volumes that came out a few years ago. Now, DC is actually putting out the Golden Age Superman omnibuses, which are also have been divided into smaller trades. I think they got like volume 4 now, but then I got the Chronicles way before, and they were a lot cheaper when they came out. And I'm actually not even getting the Golden Age Superman omnibus or the trades because I would just be repeating stories. So I'm actually hoping that upcoming volumes would serve as a way to move forward from where the Chronicles left off, the 10 volumes that came out, ended with Action Comics 54, Superman number 19, and World's Finest number 7. So from 55 onward, Action Comics 55 and Superman 20 onward, if those volumes come out, I'll probably get them to actually keep getting and reading those early Superman stories. So I'll probably be just reviewing one story, which is easy with Action Comics, but with Superman, the book actually had four stories back in the day. So I'll probably just spend either talking about one story from that issue instead of going through the first. So I might spend time, say, talking about Superman number 4 for several episodes instead of just overwhelming the video with the entire stories. Most of them didn't have titles back then, so it's easier that way. But today, I'm going to start from the very beginning. I'm not talking Action Comics number 1, which I will uh, review in a little while, but uh, going back to the story that gave us Superman, uh, which is very interesting because I've been doing a lot of research lately. There is a ton of information out there. Some of it is kind of wrong because it seems kind of biased. Some of it has been complemented and expanded upon because there's more information coming out. And I mean, really, Superman's story and everything that gave us Superman, I mean, it's not that old, but still, things happen in time and people have passed on, documents have gotten lost. So it's sort of people, comic book historians, sort of digging into the entire history of comics. Actually, that more information keeps coming out, and recently I came across information concerning Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, who is, in a sense, one of the pioneers in the comic book industry and the founder of what is DC Comics. But it's a lot more complicated than that, especially because Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, the Major, has been sort of forgotten, sort of mentioned in passing, and his role in the founding of the comic book industry has been, you know, an oversight for so long. So what we so there's is a ton of information I've come across. So I'll try to sort of give it the short version. So Major Malcolm Will Nicholson was a distinguished member of the U.S. Army. After he actually even wrote some military manuals. After he left the army, he decided to become a pulp writer and even founded his own pulp magazine publishing company. And then when he saw the comic books that were coming out in the day, which were basically just reprints of newspaper comics, or more popular newspaper comics, he saw something there that he wanted to also be part of that and publish those comic magazines. But there wasn't a lot of original material left, a lot of material to reprint, because all the good stuff, all the popular stuff, was already being reprinted. So he decided to go for original content. So in 1934, that's when he started, decided to start getting, artists and writers to submit to his magazine. And in 1935, we get the very first DC comic. The very first comic he published was called New Fun, and that, after a few years, became More Fun Comics. He released a second comic, which was New Comics, so that's why New Fun became More Fun. And New Comics evolved into becoming what we know as Adventure Comics. So among so not only was he running a comic book publishing company, he was also writing a lot of scripts as well, working with a lot of artists, and he was the first person to give and actually he gave two young men from Ohio, from Cleveland, Ohio, their first job in the comic book industry, and that was Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. So Siegel and Schuster worked for him way before Superman, but I've come across information that the Major was the first to see some of the early work on Superman that Jerry shared with him when he submitted his Henry Duval adventure strip, which was published by Wheeler Nicholson. And he really liked what he saw with Superman. He thought that he was going to be a big hit because he saw him as the hero for that time in American history. The Great Depression, that sort of hero was what was needed. But I assume it was just sketches of Superman and more than anything. So he gave Siegel and Schuster work, and so Joe and Jerry had a lot of stories published by Wheeler Nicholson. So then in 1937, he wanted to publish a third comic. Actually, he published two different books as well, sort of big anthologies, bigger than the regular comics. And he wanted to try to publish a new comic book called Detective Comics, but he couldn't afford the cost of producing the book because it was a new business that he was in comics. He was trying to pay everybody as well, so he was always running out of money just to keep financing the production of his comics. In fact, if you go to the Mike's Amazing World of Comics and you look at the New Fun, More Fun Comics publishing history, there are months where that book wasn't on sale because I assume the major needed money just to keep publishing it. And while he was getting the funds, he couldn't get them out. So, wanting to bring Detective Comics out, he went to his printer, Harry Donenfeld, and asked him for money. And Donenfeld was a very sketchy guy, seemed to have a very sketchy story, had some mob contacts as well. The printing company he owned, actually, he originally owned with his brothers, but he kicked them out, took over the whole business. He also, with other partners, created the Independent News Company, which was a distribution arm, which became a distribution arm of DC, which then had in a stranglehold, in the 50s and 60s, Martin Goodman, where they couldn't really publish a lot of, Marvel couldn't publish a lot of books, they were very limited. That was Donenfeld's business as well. So he said, sure, I'll give you the money, but you have to take my accountant, Jack Lebowitz, as your partner. So they created Detective Comics Inc., Incorporated, just to publish Detective Comics, which it seems he already had formed, the magazine, so he just needed the money to get it out. And there, again, you find work by Jerry Siegel and Jules Schuster. They actually had two features. One was Burt Regan's Spy. The other one was Lamb Bradley, which was actually created by Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, but gave the script for them to develop, which continued for a lot of years after. Then in 1938, as the Major was working on Action Comics #1, Donenfeld and Lebowitz kicked him out of the company, claiming some debt that he owed them. So he was forced to sell. They actually asked him to, so he could pay the debt, sell his share of Detective Comics Inc., as well as his own company, National Allied Publications. So by that time, Superman came along, the Major was out. Donenfeld, being a very sketchy character, found a way to make a deal with Siegel and Schuster, which I don't know if it was a good deal or if it was a bad deal, because Siegel and Schuster were already working for the company. So, working for the company, they were being paid. They knew what their fees were. Getting paid for every page they provided. So, I don't know if it was a good deal or a decent deal, or it was a better than they had before that they were allowed, that they actually accepted, because again, they were being paid by them for years because they had been providing a lot of work for them. So I don't know, we can just speculate what went down there, what at that time, but it had to be a deal that was good enough for them to accept. And perhaps it was later, as Superman became more popular and Jerry and Jonah getting their share of their creation, that maybe they felt they did get a bad deal, more than maybe the deal itself wasn't as bad. I mean, you can pay them less because they know what they were getting paid before, so it might have been that they felt that they were robbed after the fact that they couldn't, share, uh, royalties on their creation. And besides, Superman was already um, wasn't even offered to the major and to National Allied or Detective Comics Inc. by them because they wanted it to be a comic strip, which gave him much more control over the character. But because of the rejection of Superman by every syndicate, until MC Gaines, who worked at the Max Gaines, who worked at the McClure Syndicate, saw the rejected strip and sent it to Detective Comics, that they were aware of this work by Siegel and Schuster that they lacked so much. Except Donenfeld himself didn't really like Superman at all, but was making him rich anyway. So he kind of pushed that, but he didn't really like Superman. He thought he was ridiculous. That's why he didn't really appear in a lot of covers after issue number one. But he became popular enough that, okay, it's making us money. I'll take that. So that's pretty much the the short part of the story. I mean, it's of what gave us Superman. So okay, so now let's go and talk about this story, Action Comics number one. Cover dated June 1938. Probable release date was not in April as it was said. In fact, in April of 1938, it was trademarked. The was registered. It actually must have come out around May of 1938. In fact, there is information that comics used to come out the month before the cover date, and then that kind of changed to 2 months before the cover date. So Superman basically starts in the middle. We get a brief origin story of Superman, the classic story, and from there we sort of jump into a Superman carrying a woman who is guilty of murdering someone, and so the woman that was framed is about to be executed. So Superman is trying to get to the governor so that the execution could be stopped, which he does, though he does so in a very forceful way, which is typical of Superman at the time. He was very much a forceful person, and he succeeds. Then we see that he works at the Daily Star, as a new reporter. We don't know he's a new reporter. He just, we already know he's working at the Daily Star, and we got to another scene where he stops an abuser, a man who is abusing his wife physically, and then we meet Lois Lane, who works as a lovelorn columnist. Superman asks her out on a date, and so they go to this nightclub. A thuggish fellow takes Lois, so he forces himself between them, and of course Clark Kent's son, is very timid about it because he could probably zap the guy and break his neck. So he acts timid. Lois takes care of the dog herself. But soon after, the thug decides to try again and forces his car on Lewis's cab and basically abducts her. So Clark sees this. And as Superman, he basically just chases the thugs. And of course, you get the cover image, which, by the way, if you can actually see, it's all blue, right? It's like all blue here, colored all in blue, and and yeah, just say he's all colored in the same blue. So, anyways, sorry about the noise. So, anyways, Superman catches the thugs and hangs one of them. The leader, he hangs them in a in a in a pole right here, right, electric pole right there. Lewis, sort of gets frightened and carries her, so Superman carries her back to the city, and then Lewis tells George, the editor, about Superman, and like you're imagining things, and of course Lewis is kind of sore at Clark for what he did to her in the in the club, not standing up for her. So finally, the final pages takes us back. Clark gets an assignment. Because there's a war in some small small republic, and wants to send him over there to cover it. But instead, for no, Clark goes to Washington D.C., goes to a Senate hearing, and so we find that Clark actually sees the senator talking to some man who goes by the name of Alex, who later Clark finds out is Alex Greer, a lobbyist, but nobody knows what interest backs him. So Superman goes and to the apartment of the senator to overhear the conversation between Gear and the senator. So what he does is he follows the lobbyist, carries him to find out what he's up to. Takes him for a ride. Over the city. Crossing the cables. Just scaring the living hell out of him. And then they decide to say, okay, you know what? He's over at the Capitol and says he wants to jump to the other building on the other side, and apparently he misses, and it seems like they're falling to their doom, and that's where the story ends. So Action Comics doesn't really gives us a full Superman story. It doesn't even really gives us a story, but moment. There's not a central plot except introducing Superman to us. Who he is. His origin, where he comes from. All planet is Doom Planet, and he is sent to Earth, where he gets powers. We get this sort of a little explanation here of how Superman powers work, and then we're just in the middle of a story and then we get like just these moments where Superman just does these things, but there is no real central story, and it actually ends in a cliffhanger, which would continue in issue 2, and issue 2 will give us an actual story, with a central plot. This one, Action Comic number 1, are just little moments more than anything that were at that time, designed to be a full-length comic strip and not an actual comic book story. So you actually seeing, Jerry and Joe cut out the strip, the panels from the strip to actually make it into the comic format, and try to, with those submission strips that they were shopping around, create an actual some sort of an actual story, something that made somewhat some sense, as to make some sense and fill 13 pages. But they were just like little moments. But then, Superman shows up and he fights, this bad guy, and, whatever. This is just, Superman stops an execution, Superman stops a wife beater, Superman, we meet Lois Lane, Superman, and then, they go on a date, but, some thug really likes Lois, so some thug guy likes Lois, forces himself in, Lois rejects him. Clark Kent, we get to know Clark Kent as someone who's somewhat timid, who is mild mannered, who doesn't fight back for obvious reasons. So we see that Lois is more of a, even you're not gonna do anything, well, I'll do it myself. She gets kidnapped by the thug and his cronies. Superman saves Lois. Then Clark gets another assignment. Then Superman discovers that there's some shady business going on with a lobbyist and a senator, which would probably start a war, which I forgot to mention. So Superman wants to find out what's going on, and he gets the lobbyist, scares the living hell out of him, and they're about to die because Superman missed a jump. The end. And that's pretty much what we get. It's a very enjoyable story that sort of shows, if you don't get an actual story, you actually do get a good introduction of Superman and the formula somewhat, the formula of what the Superman story is going to be going forward. We know he's amazing. He does amazing things. We see that we don't really see him. We just get a general idea of what the Superman character is. If you were a kid in 1938 reading this, you would really be curious to pick up the next issue to learn more about this Superman character, because just by the deeds he does, he's fantastic figure. It's completely different from anything you've seen before in the newspaper strips, in other comics that were early comics that were coming out at the time, which I assume most of them were adventure stories or humor stories, maybe some science fiction that was coming out in the newspapers as well. So it was completely different. You kind of get an idea of who this character is, and just on looking at Action Comics number 1, you wouldn't really think it would be a success because you don't really get much of a sense, a full picture of the character, his personality. It's just very, just moving things along in a, that would tell as much of a story as you could get by picking up random strips and designing it as a comic book page. No real tight continuity between events. Just maybe the whole Daily Star part. He's a reporter. He's a Clark Kent. He's a reporter who really is Superman. You understand why he acts timid because he doesn't want to give away that he's actually this Superman character that's been showing up. When he shows up, the governor is a little surprised, but seems to be happy that he's on the side of the law and not against it. But it's just like little bullet points, I guess, of who of what this feature is going to be about. And it actually happened a lot with these early comic strips, with these really early features by, say, by Siegel and Schuster, where you kind of get the first installment as maybe an introduction, but it does sort of have a to be continued approach, and then just get all done in one stories where there's no real continuity. Just you get one story, then the next issue you get another story which has nothing or to do with the previous story, where there aren't any real subplots that carry a full narrative like they do these days. But there are like elements that are part of the formula that just repeat themselves but don't really necessarily develop into bring any actual change to the characters or the story. Just it's one story, no real sense of continuity as we know it, though, as we'll be seeing as I keep reviewing these stories, that at times Jerry Siegel would definitely sometimes direct, actually refer back to previous stories that came out, to previous stories, uh, but that's like very rare, where you actually get a little callback to a previous issue, uh, and of course have a sequel to a story as well, which actually happened around with a Luther story where there was a sequel. So I've been talking quite a bit now, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I mean, it's a little long because I really need to set the context, a little of the history before Superman, and I just go into the story itself. As we move forward into the upcoming issues, at times I will actually talk about artists that ghost artists that contributed to the Superman, to the stories, as Joe Shuster was getting busier and busier with the art, and trying to get Superman, the Superman comic out, as well as Action Comics. There will be the prints of the early ghost artists, most which have been identified. So I'll probably give a brief history on them as well, a little background on them. So thank you for watching. If you like it, don't forget to leave a like. Follow me on Twitter. I'll leave my Twitter handle in the description box. And until next time, keep smiling.